Hey friends, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new. My name is Kay. I'm a professional home organizer and I'm here to inspire you to live a more organized life. So in today's video, we're going to talk about decluttering. I did a decluttering tutorial a few years ago and I figured it was time to do an updated version of that video. As someone who has been helping people organize and set up their homes to be functional for a long time now, you would think the bulk of my activities with people would be setting up systems, putting things in a row, but it's not. It's actually, the bulk of my time is actually spent decluttering and getting things out of the home first before we do anything else. But I feel like we get stuck in this feeling of overwhelm when it comes to decluttering. So I'm going to give you an easy step-by-step guide about how to get started and how exactly to declutter. Now, this is just the system that I use. If something else works for you, that's totally fine. You do you. But if you really have no idea how to get started, I think you'd really like this video. So let's get started. So let's start by talking about why you would want to declutter your home in the first place. Like, what good reason do you have to need to declutter? I think the main thing is to talk about how your home makes you feel. The relationship between you and items is what is most important. Some people don't need to declutter because they have a really healthy relationship with the items in their home. And some people, when they walk into rooms, they feel overwhelmed. So if you're one of those people who walked into rooms and feel overwhelmed, you may need to declutter. Another sign that you may need to declutter is when you are looking for items, you are not able to find it quickly and easily. If you spend 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes looking for items pretty frequently, that may be a sign that you may need to declutter as well. If you have piled things on top of other items that you frequently need to interact with or access, that may be a sign that you need to declutter. And pretty much anytime you interact with something in your home and you have negative feelings about it, you may need to declutter that item as well as other items in your home. I find in general the most common feeling when people need to declutter is overwhelm. They feel overwhelmed either by the thought of getting rid of the item, the thought of how they're going to get rid of the item, or the fact that they have to even do it in the first place, where they want to do it, but they don't really know where to start. These are common feelings that people feel when they need to declutter, and let's start by just tackling it. So when you decided you want to go tackle it, you're going to start and grab a few things. You're going to want to grab a trash bag and a recycling bag if your area has just regular like stream recycling. You'll also want to grab a bin for the things you want to keep out of the things you're going to go through. You want to have a bin, a separate bin for items you want to declutter. This is something that a lot of people don't talk about. You want to have a bin for things that are misplaced and belong in another room. Like, let's say you're decluttering the bathroom and you suddenly find a pair of scissors that don't belong there. They belong in your office. You're going to want to take that and put it in that bin so that you can take it to your office later. You don't want to stop what you're doing to take that misplaced thing to another room. And the last bin is optional, but I highly recommend if you have trouble making decisions or you're feeling not very confident in your decluttering ability, and it is a skill that you can develop over time, is a bin for things you're not sure about, the maybe bin. Now, in the beginning of my career when I was helping people, I was very strongly discouraging people from labeling things maybe. I just wanted them to make a decision between like, yes, I'm going to keep this, or no, I'm going to declutter this. Now, after years of working with people, I'm a little bit more flexible in the maybe pile because I do realize that sometimes people have the intention of using the item, they put it away, they don't see it for months, and then all of a sudden it turns up again and they get inspired and maybe they'll want to use it again. So I'm a little more flexible with this. I encourage you not to put like a ton of things in this maybe pile. Keep it to the things that you really think that you might want to hang on to. But we'll talk a little bit more about the maybe pile in detail a little later. Now, when I say gather like a bin for these things, you don't even have to have like a physical bin. What I used to do if I didn't have bins, I used to just have a little piece of paper with a label, and I would put the label keep down on the floor, and I would just make a pile. If that works for you, that's totally doable. That's easiest for most people. I mean, if you happen to have boxes or bins or bags around, that makes it a lot easier to separate items, but if you want to make piles, that is perfectly fine. Totally legal. So if you need to declutter your entire house or you need to declutter an entire room, I highly recommend that you start small and declutter the smallest space you can, especially if you're getting started and you have a big job to do. There's something that I call like the big list, right? Like if I want to declutter my entire home, that's the biggest of the biggest list. Then you want to break that into smaller categories like bedroom, bathroom, kitchen. And then when you get to let's say you get to your kitchen, you want to start decluttering your kitchen. This is the big start to decluttering your home. You want to start with one drawer. You want to start with something manageable that you think you can tackle, that you definitely can see yourself getting to the finish line in a single afternoon or in a day. You don't want to start too big because sometimes you need to accumulate some wins before you really start to attack the hard stuff. Okay, so now you've got your bins or your piles all set up, and you're sitting down in front of this drawer and you want to just put on some fun music or a podcast or a YouTube video, make the environment kind of fun or enjoyable, and you want to start to pick up items and handle them and ask yourself a few questions. Have I used this in the past year? I find that a year is a pretty good indicator of how much you're actually using an item, because some items really only get used once a year, right? Like I have cookie cutters that I only use at Christmas time. Otherwise, I'm not really cutting cookies. I think that's a realistic time frame to whether or not an item really gets used or not. The next question to ask yourself is, if I haven't used it, do I intend to use it in the future, and when? I like to encourage my clients whenever they're going through this exercise to actually think of scenarios that are either in the future, very specific scenarios in which they'll use this item if they haven't used it in the past year and they bought it with good intentions. Let's say it's a beautiful dress that they bought like on sale somewhere, and they bought it with the intention of wearing to a wedding. But let's say they haven't had any friends that are getting married in maybe 5-6 years, and now they've had this dress for 5 or 6 years hanging on the rack. Do you realistically see yourself still loving that after all that time? Maybe your style has changed. So I really want you to ask yourself, do you have a really specific plan for that item? Because we all can make up really abstract plans for items, right? But it's much more intentional to come up with specific use items, like, you know what, there's a birthday party happening next week, I'm going to wear that dress then. So I really encourage you to ask yourself when you intend to use this item, especially if you haven't used it in the past year. Does this item make me super happy when I look at it? It is totally legal and fine to have items in your home that don't have any uses, that are just tchotchkes and knickknacks that make you happy. I've got like Pokemon figures. I've got like old Nintendo consoles that don't work. These things are just aesthetic and make me feel good. So any item that you have in your home that you are not sure whether you want to keep or to hang around, does it really make you happy when you see it? And if the answer is yes, then I think it's probably okay to keep it. If you're saying this to many items, but you still have that feeling of overwhelmed, you may need to bring in a third party to help you decide whether or not how many of those items to keep. But if you feel like you can make a good, solid decision about an item that just makes you happy, that doesn't really have much use, it's totally okay to keep it. If it really doesn't bring you any joy, like if it's a knickknack that someone gave to you like 5 years ago and you think it's kind of ugly, just go ahead and get rid of it. The final question I want you to ask yourself is, would I replace this if it were lost or destroyed? Like, let's say you were to suddenly lose your favorite chef's knife. You would definitely repurchase it, right? So after you've gone through the whole series of questions about whether this item is important or relevant in your life, and you get to the fact that, like, if this item got destroyed, or if it broke, or if I just lost it on the street, would I go and purchase the exact same item to replace it? And if the answer is no, then I think you have your answer whether or not you need to declutter it. Okay, so now that you've answered all those questions and you've dealt with all the items you've made, and again, I encourage you to start with a really small amount of items if it's your first time decluttering, or if you don't feel confident decluttering, and you can totally develop this skill. The more you do this, the more confident you'll get in your own decisions. So after you've done that, you've got all your things in piles or in bins. Now you've got that maybe pile that I like to call purgatory. We will talk about what to do with the purgatory pile. I encourage you to put the purgatory pile someplace where you can access it, but it's not with the rest of your stuff. And if you think about using that item within a time frame that you're going to give yourself, you'll know. Maybe you'll give yourself a few weeks, maybe you'll give yourself a few months, maybe you'll give yourself a year. I wouldn't go longer than a year to use this item. And if you don't reach for it, then I think it's okay at that point to let it go. Some people put this box in the basement. Some people put this box in like the guest room, just someplace where it's just not with the rest of your items, so that you can so that you don't have to make space for it in the meantime. But like, let's say I put the cupcake carrier in the maybe pile, and like all of a sudden I had an occasion for a billion birthday parties that year. Maybe I might need the cupcake carrier after all. Then I would go to the maybe pile and bring it back into my inventory. But if the need never arises, then that's a good indicator that that stuff can go ahead and go out the door. So often when I'm with clients, I find that there are a lot of hangups about whether or not they want to get rid of certain items because they don't like the item, but there's something holding them back from actually decluttering it. And we'll talk about some of those traps right now. So I want you to ask yourself some questions if you're really struggling with getting rid of a certain item. And the first question I want you to ask yourself is, am I holding on to it because it was a gift and I feel guilty for decluttering it? Am I holding on to this because I spent a lot of money on it? Am I holding on to this because my fantasy self is definitely going to use it? Or am I holding on to it because I want to make sure it gets recycled or has a definite other home where someone's going to use it? So let's tackle these one at a time. I come across this a lot where people feel guilty about decluttering items that were gifts from people, often gifts from people that they loved, not just gifts from, it's more gifts from people that they loved and not some random gift that someone gave you from like your office Christmas party or something. So, and I know that gift giving is a lot of people's love language. It's the way they show affection for one another. And some people who if gift giving is their love language can be hurt a little bit when they see the item is decluttered from the receiver's life. And I want to tell you that sometimes there is really no way to win in that scenario, but I find it in most scenarios, if an item that you got from someone is just sitting around, maybe it gets moved from closet to closet, or a sweater that someone gave you that you think is not flattering and never gets worn, I don't think that that person that gave you that would want that for that item and want that for you. And at the end of the day, I don't think they really want you to hang on to something that you don't really like just because it was given to them as a gift. So I say stop feeling guilty. There's no point in feeling guilty. It's not going to do anything for you. It's not going to do anything for the sweater that you hate. Just go ahead and declutter the item. Know that you still love the person that gave it to you, but it's just an item that they gave you, and it would probably serve someone else a lot better than it's serving you right now. Actually, most likely. You want to have things in your space that serve you, that you absolutely love, need, or use. You don't want to have anything else. If you are holding on to items because you spent a lot of money on them, I am sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but the money is already gone. It's already left your wallet, and you're not going to suddenly get that money back just by holding on to the item and not using it. It does make us feel really bad when we make a sizable investment in an item and it turns out to be not useful, or we don't use it. We can feel really bad. So you have a couple of choices. You have a choice to just declutter the item and just sort of eat the cost of whatever you paid for it, or you could choose to sell it. Now, selling comes with all kinds of responsibilities and a time investment, and time is money. You have to decide how much you want to sell it for. You have to take pictures of it, list it, write a whole description, and then negotiate with possible buyers, deal with payment, possible shipping, just meeting someone in a public place to have them come do the whole exchange and maybe possibly getting scammed. How much is just having that item out of your life worth to you? And sometimes I feel like going through with a sale is totally worth it. I did like an entire closet sale on Poshmark, I think a few years ago, and that was worth it to me. I made, a few dollars on that, and I was like, yeah, I don't want to give all of these clothes away. But at one point, I just got fed up and I was like, I just need these out of my closet right now. So it's up to you whether or not you want to try and recoup some of the cost of the item. Chances are you're not going to recoup the total cost of the item unless it's worth, an insane amount of money. So I always leave it up to clients to decide how much they're going to invest. Like, I have a rule where, like, if I pay like $100 for the item, maybe I'll sell it and try to recoup some of the cost. But if, everyone has their own personal cap, maybe for you it's $50, maybe for you it's $20, but how much is your time worth to invest to actually sell it? And most of the time I'm going to tell you it's not worth it. So selling items is perfectly fine, but the money's already been spent. just get it out of your home any way you can, and just know that selling takes up a lot of time and effort. If you're holding on to an item because your fantasy self is definitely going to use it, I have been there, just accept that maybe your fantasy self isn't who you really are. And sometimes it's really hard to accept who you really are. And I would love to be the kind of person who crochets and does watercolor painting, but instead I'm the kind of person that plays video games and writes in my journal. And I'd much rather do those things. And that aspirational person who really wants to do those things is not really who I am at my core. And you have to ask yourself some really hard questions. You're like, am I holding on to these ski boots and these skis because I want to be a skier, or because I think it would be cool to be a skier, but I really don't want to learn to ski? Just ask yourself some really hard questions and just be honest with who you are and be happy with who you are. Who you are is fine. It's better than fine. It's great. And lastly, if you're worried about items, if you're worried about how they're going to be recycled or what's going to happen to them once they leave your possession, that's an understandable place to be. I am also concerned about waste, about things ending up in landfills. I'm concerned about things getting properly recycled. And the only answer to that is I want you to do the best you can and be okay with that. There's no guarantees. You're going to have to be comfortable with a little bit of uncertainty. And I know that makes you really uncomfortable. It makes me uncomfortable when I just kind of give an item away and I don't know what's going to happen to it. I'm like, I wanted to get a really amazing second life, and I want things that I put to be recycled and become other things so that people can use them and help protect our environment. But at the end of the day, there's no guarantees. So my suggestion to you is just do the best you can. Do your very best research. There's a lot of places that do follow through with their recycling intentions, and you can really feel good about having your items have a really lovely second home. But I have come across people who just obsess about this, and it stops them from even getting started, and it's very overwhelming. So my suggestion to you is just accept a little bit of uncertainty and do the best you can. We're all doing the best we can. So the last piece of advice I'm going to give you is to go ahead and declutter, actually get the items out of your house the same day or the next day, or even in that week if you can. The longer items sit around to be donated, the less likely you are to do it. I find that the longer I wait to actually do a task, the more insurmountable it seems, right? Like the longer you procrastinate, the harder it is to actually get started. And that's coming from me. I am the ultimate procrastinator. And I'm going to encourage you to stop that, because I know that I try very hard to not wait for motivation, but to just do the thing, because motivation will never come. It never comes. So I find that after I declutter and I have this pile of things that I want to get rid of, I will drive to my donation center. I will put them on Facebook Marketplace, like everything free, and just have everybody just come collect the items. Just like, get them out of your house as soon as you can. Then that gives you two huge wins. You both decluttered and you got rid of the items that you decluttered. It's going to make you feel so good. All right, that was it for my decluttering tutorial. I hope that was helpful. In my next video, I'm going to talk about my basic organizing concepts that work for most people, 99% of people. Everyone's different, but I find that after working with hundreds of people, a lot of us are a lot the same. A lot. All right, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.